The sun had barely climbed over the dry red hills when the dusty frontier town began waking up, one slow sound at a time. A lonely wind dragged sand across the wooden street, rattling a loose shutter and whistling against the cracked sign of the small trading post. Horses shifted near the hitching rail, and the smell of burned coffee slipped through the open window of the only diner in town. It looked like an ordinary morning in an old American settlement where ranchers, hunters, trappers, and travelers passed through with quiet stories and silent scars. But that day felt different, heavier, like the land itself was holding its breath. Even the men who normally carried loud jokes and rough laughter seemed quieter than usual. Watching something near the center of the street with mixed curiosity, unease, and doubt. A crowd had gathered near the sheriff's porch, but no lawman stood with pride that morning. Instead, a woman sat in the corner of the platform, her wrists bound with thick rope, her ankles tied together so she could not move far. Her hair hung long and uncombed down her shoulders, and her clothing was worn, torn and covered in dust from a long journey no one cared to explain. She was an Apache woman, captured somewhere beyond the ridges, brought here by men who believed money mattered more than humanity. Some whispered with pity, some with fear, and others with greed. The woman did not speak at first. She sat with her back straight, breathing slow, eyes steady like someone raised by mountains and taught by hardship. Rumors traveled faster than horses in a frontier town. By sunrise, every person knew she was being held for trade under the excuse of punishment. They claimed she was caught trespassing on land now owned by settlers, though no one could agree where she had been found or what she had done. Some said she defended herself, others said she was hunted unfairly. A few believed she should be taken to a reservation. But the men who brought her wanted payment instead, calling it a deal and not a crime. It was wrong, and most people knew it, yet fear made them silent. She was described as dangerous, wild, and fierce. Yet she sat with more quiet dignity than anyone watching her. Across the street stood a traveler leaning beside his horse saddle, watching silently. He had come from a far valley, looking for supplies before riding toward an empty ranch he recently inherited. He had no wife, no children, and no reason to stay in any town longer than needed. His life had been shaped by storms, loss, and long nights near dying fires. He kept to himself and avoided trouble, but when his gaze met the Apache woman, something struck his chest, like a memory he did not recognize. Her eyes did not hold defeat nor fear, but a deep plea hidden behind pride. He felt something familiar in that silent stare, like two forgotten souls recognizing pain inside one another without saying a word. The crowd slowly grew larger, and murmurs turned into suggestions, offers, and comments without shame. The woman listened quietly, though her breathing grew heavier. The men who captured her tried to present themselves as heroes, claiming she was dangerous and must be controlled. Yet no one saw danger in her posture, only exhaustion. A few women in the crowd looked at her with sadness, but none dared step forward to protest. They knew how this land worked and how quickly voices could be silenced. At last, two traders lifted her to her feet so she could stand while the crowd judged. She did not cry or protest. She looked across the faces one by one, searching for a trace of kindness. Her voice trembled only when she spoke for the first time. And it was not anger or hatred that came out, but a plea no one expected. She asked for dignity, not rescue. She asked for a future, not pity. Her voice was soft but filled with the strength of someone refusing to break. She said she would rather belong to a man with a heart than stay under the control of those who viewed her as less than human. She believed marriage could protect her, save her, and give her a place where she would not be harmed or treated like property. The words shocked many because she asked them on her own, not under force. Her chin lifted and she spoke again, telling them she wanted a chance to live with honor, not in chains or locked rooms. The wind seemed to stop as she whispered her plea, and even the most hardened men paused. The traveler felt something move inside him. He had seen unfair things in life, but never something that struck so close to the soul. He remembered how it felt to lose freedom, how it felt when fate twisted life without mercy. He stepped forward a little, though he did not speak yet. He wondered what had happened to her family, if she still had a home somewhere past the hills, or if she was completely alone. He wondered what kind of courage it took for her to choose hope. Instead of silence, her next words were the ones that echoed through every heart listening. Her voice broke just once, and she looked not at the crowd but at the traveler, who unknowingly had become her only chance. She said she would rather become a wife by choice than remain a prisoner under cruelty. And then she spoke the words that froze his steps, changing the air between them. She asked him to take her not as a servant, but as a partner who could learn, help, and build a life with time, patience, human respect. She asked him with quiet desperation, yet strong intention. She told him she wanted to survive. She wanted peace. She wanted a home. When her voice dropped into a soft whisper, every person present heard it, even if they pretended not to be affected. She asked him to save her future. Her final words came slow, shaking through fear and courage at the same time, as she whispered for him to buy her only to protect her and make her his wife. She wanted a place where no one would hurt her, and where she could earn trust rather than be treated like a chained animal. The traveler stepped closer, unsure if he even had the right to interfere, yet his heart refused to turn away. The people waited, whispering, wondering what he would do. Some hoped for a dramatic moment, others wished for the scene to end quickly, while a few feared a change in fate they could not control. The woman looked at him with steady eyes filled with hope and doubt mixed together. His boots touched the wooden step, and the wind blew across both of them, almost like the land wanted to hear his answer. She stood silent, waiting, struggling to breathe through the tension. It felt like the world paused between two choices that could change both of their lives forever. The answer remained untold. The ropes remained tight, and the future hung in the air like a silent storm forming beyond the ridge. The traveler did not answer right away, and the silence felt long enough to weigh on every shoulder in town. Even the horse beside him stopped moving, as if it sensed a decision hanging in the air. He kept his eyes on the Apache woman, trying to understand her past, her voice, and the truth behind her desperate request. He did not know her name, yet he felt the pressure of her hope, like a hand gripping his chest. She stood still, watching him, her wrists still tied, breathing carefully so she would not show how close she was to breaking on the inside. The men who captured her seemed irritated that the moment stretched too long. They wanted quick business, not emotions. They threatened to move her to the back if no one made an offer, claiming she could be taken, somewhere worse, where no one would ever see her again. The traveler forced himself to look away for a moment, as memories from his own life returned like shadows. Before he became a man who drifted across the frontier alone, he had a family far from this wild land. His father had raised him to believe a person was worth more than money or land. But loss had destroyed his home. A fever swept through his family during a harsh winter, taking lives faster than doctors could stand. When he buried the last person he loved, he stopped speaking for months, burned by grief that did not leave even after years of riding through empty places. Those memories shaped him into someone who refused to separate people into categories like enemy, savage, or property. Every soul deserved a chance to live without fear. His thoughts returned to the present when the woman slightly shifted her weight, almost stumbling, reminding him she was still tied like livestock on display. He stepped closer until he was near enough to hear her slow breathing. She raised her eyes with caution, not forcing hope, but silently asking if he could at least listen before deciding. He saw strength in her posture, even in chains. She did not look like someone who surrendered easily. Yet she was willing to speak from her heart because her survival depended on it. A few women from town whispered nearby, trying to understand her story. One claimed she heard that the Apache woman once lived near a river to the north, where her family kept a peaceful life away from conflict. Another said she had been promised to a man of her own people before tragedy struck. None of them knew for certain, but their voices carried a tone mixed with sorrow and curiosity. Children watched with wide eyes, too young to understand the rules of land and power, but old enough to feel the wrongness. The traveler finally spoke, breaking the tension with a calm voice. He asked the captors what proof they had of any crime. The men shrugged and claimed no one needed proof on frontier land. They said she was found where she should not be, near a ranch that did not belong to her people. The traveler argued that land did not belong to one side alone, especially in a place where both settlers and native tribes had walked long before fences existed. One of the captors told him to stop asking useless questions and either pay or move aside. The woman looked at him again, as if she understood he was not simply deciding with his wallet, but with his soul. She spoke softly and explained that she had been searching for someone when she was found by the captors. She had been following a trail from her homeland, trying to locate a younger relative who vanished months before. She believed the missing person might have been taken or driven toward unfamiliar land. She had no weapons when captured, only a small pouch with dried fruit and herbs. She said she tried to speak peacefully, but the men tied her without giving her a chance to explain. Her heart had grown heavier every mile she was forced to walk while her mission remained unfinished. The travelers listening nearby began to feel a twist of sympathy and confusion. Few people in the town ever heard about the inner struggles of native families. It was easier to assume they were all enemies or dangers. Yet this woman was not speaking like a fighter seeking revenge, but like someone searching for a lost piece of her life. The traveler felt his heartbeat quicken. He asked if she still believed the missing person was alive. She nodded slowly and said she could not lose hope, because family was the only treasure a person could never replace. A quiet chill moved across the crowd. The trader who controlled the transaction finally announced that if someone wanted her, they needed to decide now. He claimed she could be taken down the next trail before sunset and sold to someone far less gentle. The traveler clenched his jaw, feeling torn. He wanted to help, but he feared he might not be the right person. Could he protect her, give her shelter, and help her continue her search, while the world judged every move they made as strange or wrong? He looked again at the ropes, at the dusty road, at the tired expression in her eyes. And he realized that turning away would haunt him forever. Even if he could not promise success, he could at least promise she would not suffer alone. But before he could speak, an older rancher stepped forward and said he might take her for labor on his property. His voice was rough, and his tone lacked kindness. He did not speak of respect or partnership, only work and ownership. The Apache woman closed her eyes for a short moment, perhaps preparing for a fate worse than silence. The traveler moved before thinking. He told the rancher to stand back and said she should not be treated like an animal or a tool. The rancher scoffed and argued that she was not his concern. A few of his friends nodded, trying to intimidate anyone who disagreed. The woman watched them with her chin lifted again, but there was worry inside her gaze. The traveler focused on her, not the men, and asked if she still wanted him to take responsibility if he stepped forward. She answered in a whisper that she only wanted safety, respect, and a chance to continue her search without cruelty. He stepped closer to the traders and asked how much they wanted. They shared greedy smiles, sensing an emotional buyer. The price they mentioned was more than the traveler expected, but not impossible. He hesitated, not because of the money, but because he felt the weight of making a vow no man should break. Once he paid, her future would become connected to his, and there would be no turning back. She watched him breathe slowly, as if she understood every silent doubt forming inside him, before he could give an answer. Thunder rumbled far from the hills, though the sky had shown no sign of storm. The sound startled a few people and scattered some horses near the rail. A gust of wind hit the street, carrying dust into the air. It felt like a sign, though no one could tell what kind. The trader grew impatient and demanded an answer. The traveler looked at the woman one more time, searching for any hint that he might be making a mistake. He saw no deception, no anger, and no hidden plan. Only a woman who refused to surrender her soul, even when stripped of freedom. He knew that whatever happened next would shape both their lives in ways he could not predict. His hand moved slowly toward the coins inside his pocket. The crowd held their breath again. As the choice reached its final moment, would he give everything he had for a woman he barely knew, or would fear push him away like everyone else? The coins remained in his hand, but his voice had not spoken yet. The traveler stared at the coins in his palm, feeling the old metal pressing into his skin like a weight heavier than any saddle he ever carried. The trading men leaned closer, their eyes sharp with hunger, sensing profit and control. The Apache woman stood motionless. But inside her quiet gaze there was a storm of fear mixed with something that looked like silent courage. She was not begging now. Instead, she watched as if she was testing whether the world still held a place, where a person could choose to live with respect instead of chains. The traveler felt the crowd behind him shift. Whispering as though they were trying to predict his next breath, he pulled in one slow breath and asked the traders once more if they would release her fully and never return for her again. They agreed too quickly, swearing they would disappear with the payment. But their voices carried a slick tone that made his spine tighten. He had seen men who claimed honor yet twisted deals when darkness fell. But walking away was no longer possible. Something deep inside him told him this moment was not only about her fate, but his own soul. He placed the coins into the trader's palm and demanded the ropes be cut immediately. The men grinned like wolves, but did as told, slicing the rope around her wrists and ankles. When the ropes dropped, she did not run. She stood silently, rubbing her bruised skin, her eyes lowered with relief, but not complete trust. The traveler offered his hand very slowly, not as a command, but as a sign. After a moment of hesitation, she placed her hand in his, showing she accepted protection, but not ownership. The trader laughed and walked away, pocketing the payment. Shouting to his friends that there was more money to be found somewhere else, the townspeople scattered gradually, some shaking their heads, others wiping tears of sympathy they tried to hide. Only a few remained. Watching with uncertain curiosity, the traveler guided the woman away from the porch and toward his horse, still unsure of what to say. She did not speak either, and the silence between them carried more meaning than words could hold. Finally, he asked if she wanted water or rest. She nodded gently, whispering that her legs felt weak from days of being pushed across dirt roads with no real rest. He helped her sit in the shade near the stable, where she sipped water slowly, careful not to cough. He gave her his coat, even though the sun was warm, because she trembled not from cold, but from nerves that still clung to her bones as she recovered. A few men approached, pretending they wanted to congratulate him, but their smiles were sharp and heavy with suspicion. They claimed they were only curious why he would pay for someone who carried the blood of a tribe many settlers feared. The traveler said he did not believe fear should decide a person's value. They smirked and warned him that keeping her near could bring trouble to both of them. He did not argue, but his eyes hardened. Once they left, the woman whispered that danger followed her path, and she did not want to bring harm to anyone who showed kindness. The traveler said danger already existed in every corner of the frontier, and fear could not be the only voice that guided choices. When she regained enough strength to stand, he gently asked if she still wished to remain under his protection or if she wanted to travel alone. She answered with quiet honesty. She said she wanted to continue searching for the missing person she spoke of, but she no longer had a horse, supplies, or a safe path to travel alone. She said if he allowed it, she would stay by his side, work hard, respect his home, and share whatever knowledge she had. He nodded and said they would ride together for now, and when the time came, she would decide her own direction. He then asked if she wished to tell her name, but she lowered her gaze and said she would share it. When she felt the moment was right, soon they packed supplies from the small store in town. Some people watched from windows, whispering quietly, wondering what story was forming. The traveler helped her mount the horse carefully before climbing behind her to guide the reins. As they rode through the dusty road leading out of town, he felt the weight of new responsibility, and she felt the strange mix of safety and fear that came with trusting a stranger. The wind blew across the plains, carrying dust and wild grass scent, while their journey began with no clear destination. Only the promise that neither of them would face the next miles alone. Their travel took them across rolling land, where dry grass brushed against the horses' legs. As sunset approached, they found a small patch of cottonwoods near a shallow stream. He built a simple fire while she gathered brush to help start it, neither speaking much, but their silence felt natural. When the fire warmed the air around them, she shared pieces of her past. She said her family lived deep in the northern hills near a river that flowed through pine and stone. Her people once traded peacefully with nearby travelers, until conflict pushed every group into fear and separation. She said the missing person she searched for was someone young, who had wandered off for curiosity and never returned. Tracks had led toward unknown land. The weather erased them before they could follow farther. The traveler listened without interrupting, feeling a heavy ache in his chest. He could not imagine losing the last piece of family in a world where distances were vast and dangers silent. He then spoke about his past, how sickness took those he loved, leaving him alone in a large empty house that never felt like home again. His voice shook, but he kept talking, because sharing with someone who understood loss felt strangely healing. She listened with quiet respect, her eyes soft with understanding. Through the night, distant coyote calls echoed from the ridges, but neither of them felt frightened. Instead, they watched the stars rising above dark land, bright with steady light. When it was time to rest, the traveler stayed awake first to ensure she felt safe. She slept lightly, turning at every sound. When his eyes finally closed, the sky was growing pale with early dawn. Their journey continued for days. They crossed narrow canyons, dense tree lines, and open plains where the wind howled across dry rock. They passed an abandoned cabin, a burned wagon, and a broken trail marker, reminding them how harsh the land could be. But they also found small springs, wild berries, and old animal tracks that she could read like stories written in dirt. She taught him how to walk silently, how to read the wind, and how plants near water grew differently than those born of dry soil. He watched with quiet amazement, realizing she carried knowledge he never imagined, yet their peaceful travel did not erase the shadow that followed them. More than once they saw old tracks that did not belong to animals. Twice they heard distant riders at night, too far to see, but close enough to warn that someone might be watching. One evening they arrived near a small mountain ridge where they chose to camp beneath a cluster of trees. As she prepared a small meal over fire, he noticed something strange. 3 figures on horseback were stopped on a far hill, barely visible in the fading light, but their silhouettes were not friendly. The traveler whispered for her to stay close. She glanced toward the hill and froze. She said she recognized the way one of the riders held his reins. They were the same men who captured her. Their presence raised new questions. Why were they following? Did they want more money, revenge, or something darker? The riders turned away slowly, disappearing behind the hill. The fire crackled softly as both she and the traveler sat in tense silence. Knowing that whatever waited ahead might bring danger neither of them had prepared for, that night she could not sleep. She looked at the ridge for hours, wondering whether her path was cursed or whether fate needed her to keep moving forward. The traveler watched her from the other side of the fire, realizing he was no longer simply protecting her. Whether he wished it or not, their lives had become tied together by an invisible thread neither could break. The next morning they packed quietly, aware that the uncertain road ahead was turning darker, and the truth surrounding her capture, her missing family, and the riders in the distance was much deeper than either of them first believed. The morning light was pale and slow, as if even the sun sensed something uncertain, waiting on the trail ahead. The Apache woman stood still near the horse, tightening the saddle straps with calm hands, but her eyes drifted toward the far ridge again and again. The traveler could see she was thinking hard, weighing fear against purpose. He filled the small canteen at a stream nearby, trying to act steady even though his own pulse felt uneven. Neither wanted to speak the worry that rode silently between them, but both understood that whatever happened next was no longer just a journey. It was a crossing point between who they were and who they might become. They mounted the horse and began moving north. Following faint markers she remembered from her earlier search, the land grew tougher as they traveled, with rocks rising like old bones from the earth and narrow passes forcing them to stay close. Every sound felt sharper. Every shadow looked suspicious. The wind carried dust that clung to their skin and clothes, and though the day was warm, both felt a cold sense of being watched. The traveler tried to distract her by asking about what she remembered near the river where her people lived. She spoke slowly, describing how the trees there grew tall, how children used to play near the water, and how laughter once filled the air. He noticed she spoke in past tense, and that quiet detail struck him harder than thunder. By the second afternoon, they reached a valley with scattered boulders and thorn bushes. The woman leaned forward as if her instincts sharpened. She said she sensed they were getting closer to something, though she did not know if it was hope or danger. They found signs confirming recent human presence, footprints near a creek bed, ashes from an old fire, and a piece of cloth caught on a branch. She knelt beside it with trembling hands, breathing deeply. The cloth was familiar, a pattern she recognized from her homeland. She held it to her chest before whispering that the missing young one had worn something similar. The traveler knelt beside her, placing one hand softly on her shoulder. He did not offer empty promises. He simply stood with her, letting silence act as a shield against despair as they prepared to move again. The sound of hooves echoed from somewhere unseen. The traveler quickly pulled her behind a rock formation, whispering for her to stay quiet. 3 riders appeared on a nearby ridge, the same shadows they had seen before. One rider scanned the area like a hawk searching for prey, his hand near his holster. The second rider leaned over his saddle, pointing toward the valley floor. They spoke in low voices, but the tone carried sharp intent. The third rider's horse kicked up dust and circled impatiently. After a long minute, they turned south, leaving the valley with heavy suspicion still lingering in the air. The woman exhaled and gripped the cloth tighter. As if her heart fought between hope and fear, they continued deeper through the valley until the sun began to fall. The traveler suggested they rest only for a short while, not daring to make a fire. They ate dry biscuits and small berries she found near a tree line. When night fell, the air grew colder and the sky filled with stars that shone brighter than lantern light. She stayed awake longer than usual, sitting close enough to hear the traveler breathing but not speaking. Eventually, she whispered that if something happened to her on this journey, she wanted him to know she had never stopped believing in finding the missing one. He sat up slowly, looking at her with steady patience. He told her nothing would happen under his watch. She thanked him without lifting her eyes. She feared her voice would break. At dawn, they started again, pushing farther into unknown land. The terrain led them near a narrow canyon trail with steep walls on both sides. The horse grew restless, as if smelling something unsettling. Halfway through, they found smoke rising from a distant hollow. The traveler held up a hand, telling the horse to stand still. The woman pointed silently, recognizing the smoke pattern as one used by her people for quiet signaling, not cooking. That discovery sent energy through her limbs like a spark of life. She asked if they could go closer. The traveler agreed, but insisted on caution, making a long curved approach along the canyon side to avoid being seen too early. When they reached a hidden vantage point, they saw a small group of people near a low shelter made of branches and stone. The shelter looked temporary, like it was made in haste. The woman leaned forward with wide eyes. She saw a young figure near the shelter, thin and pale, but alive. Her hand rose to her mouth as tears filled her eyes. She whispered that it might be the person she searched for. The traveler wanted to move toward the camp immediately, but he noticed something troubling. Along the edge of the clearing, he spotted a rope hanging from a tree and supplies scattered as if someone had left quickly. Something felt off. He asked her to wait until they understood the situation clearly. Their plan was interrupted by a sudden crack of a twig behind them. The Apache woman froze. The traveler turned slowly to see one of the 3 riders standing behind a boulder, holding a rifle pointed slightly downward, but ready. His eyes were cold and determined. Before either of them could speak, the other 2 riders stepped out from the shadows, blocking their retreat. The leader stepped forward and said they had not traveled so far just to let them walk away with what they called valuable information. The woman stepped in front of the traveler instinctively, even though she was unarmed. The leader smirked, amused by her bravery. The traveler demanded to know why they were following them. The leader replied that they had once found something valuable near those northern hills, something they believed belonged to them now. It became clear these men were the reason the missing young one had disappeared in the first place. The woman's eyes filled with horror and rage, but she did not scream. She asked where the missing one was and what they wanted. The leader avoided her question, instead saying he would trade answers for something better than coins: cooperation. The rider closest to her tried to grab her arm, but the traveler stepped between them, pushing the man back slightly. The tension turned sharp. One incorrect move could turn the air into violence. The leader warned that they were outnumbered and had no chance of escape. The traveler whispered for her not to panic. She whispered back that she had no intention of dying without fighting for her people. Before anything else happened, another sound came from the shelter below: faint footsteps and a soft cough. The missing young one, hearing voices, stepped out weakly. The Apache woman's heart broke open, but she could not call out or run because the riders watched her closely. The younger figure blinked slowly, confused and unaware of the danger surrounding the ridge. The traveler noticed their weakening state and realized that time was running fast, with both safety and rescue slipping through their fingers. If they made one wrong move, the leader demanded that the traveler hand over supplies, weapons and horse, in exchange for letting them leave alive. The traveler's grip tightened, knowing that if he surrendered, he would lose the only means to protect her and help the lost young one. The woman whispered urgently that the missing one was too weak to survive another capture, and that they must think quickly. The riders warned that hesitation would turn into regret. The air grew heavy, like the land itself was holding breath for the outcome. The woman moved her foot slightly as if measuring the ground for escape. The traveler glanced at her, seeing both fear and fire in her eyes, facing 3 armed men with one weak soul depending on them. He understood that the next choice would push all of them into the edge between life and ruin. And just as the leader stepped closer, raising his weapon to force a final answer, the sound of another unexpected presence echoed across the canyon, shifting everything in a single heartbeat. A sharp voice echoed from behind the riders, firm and steady, like someone who had watched long enough and could not stay silent anymore. All 3 riders turned at once, surprised to find an older Apache man stepping from the tree shadows with a handmade bow, drawn but pointed downward, not yet released. His hair was long and streaked with age, but his feet were planted like someone born from earth and wind. Behind him, 2 more figures appeared, also from her tribe, not threatening but clearly ready if danger grew. The leader of the riders cursed under his breath, realizing they were not as hidden or powerful as they believed. The traveler stayed still, silently praying that no one made a mistake that would spark disaster. The Apache woman's eyes filled with recognition and fresh hope. She whispered that the older man was once a respected scout from her homeland, someone who had taught young ones how to read nature and move without fear. The scout spoke directly to the rider leaders, saying he had followed their trail for days, studying every move, and knew they had taken the missing young one to force them away from their own land. He warned them that harming families for land or greed always returned to haunt hearts sooner or later, even if not by weapons. The leader of the riders swallowed hard but tried to stay bold, claiming it was just business and no one was hurt. But the scout pointed to the weak young figure near the shelter, showing that survival itself carried wounds that could not always be seen on skin. The tension slowly changed. The rider closest to the woman lowered his gun first, realizing they were outmatched not by numbers but by truth. The second rider looked uneasy, unable to hold his stare against the silent strength of the Apache group. The leader was the last to back down, and even he did so reluctantly. The traveler stepped forward, speaking calmly to bring the moment to peace rather than revenge. He said what mattered now was safety and healing, not punishment. The woman nodded, asking that no one shed blood in a moment that could become a chance for peace instead. The scout agreed, reminding everyone that new paths must start somewhere, or history would always repeat old wounds. With slow steps, the leader finally dropped his weapon to the dirt. He muttered that he never planned to kill anyone, and that he only wanted to profit from things he did not understand. The scout told him that ignorance can be changed if a person truly wants to walk differently. The young rider beside him offered to help carry supplies to the shelter, showing his shame quietly through action, not words. The leader hesitated, then joined, knowing his pride mattered less than saving face through stubbornness. As the tension faded, the Apache woman rushed to the weak young one. kneeling and wrapping them in her arms with relief so deep it shook her shoulders. The traveler knelt beside them and gave water in slow sips, making sure not to cause choking. The young one whispered faintly, recognizing the woman and smiling with weary joy. She held their face gently and thanked the sky for guiding her long steps, no matter how painful they had been. When she looked at the traveler, her eyes carried both gratitude and unspoken emotion that had grown quietly through the journey. With the help of the scout and the tribe members, the young one was moved to a safer place within the small shelter where warm blankets, herbal medicine, and broth were prepared. The riders remained at a distance, silent, confused by how kindness had replaced the revenge they expected. After some time, the leader cautiously approached the traveler and admitted that he had never seen someone pay money to protect a stranger without expecting something back. The traveler answered that humanity held more value than land, coins, or pride. The leader listened quietly, and no one could say if it changed him forever. But his eyes softened enough to show that the message reached somewhere inside. The scout thanked the traveler with respect, saying that acts of honor do not disappear even when miles pass behind them. He said the Apache woman and the young one were free to return with him if they wished. She looked at the traveler for a long moment, then spoke gently. She said she had been searching for her lost family for so long that she almost forgot what it felt like to be seen as a person and not a problem. She said he had shown bravery not by fighting, but by choosing compassion when others chose fear. The traveler looked away briefly, unsure of how to speak his feelings, then finally asked if she wanted to return with her people immediately or stay near him longer. The choice he offered was not ownership, but freedom. She turned to the scout and the young one, who both smiled with understanding. The scout said she was free to walk whichever path called her soul, and that home could exist in more than one place if a heart allowed it. She walked closer to the traveler, placing her hand on his chest the way a person touches truth, not possession. She said she wanted to return to her homeland first because healing and family must come before any new journey. But she also said she did not want their bond to end on that ridge. She asked if he would be willing to visit her homeland after some time, not as owner or rescuer, but as someone she could call friend, partner, and perhaps even husband if destiny allowed. His eyes warmed, and he promised he would ride north when her family had healed, and when she felt ready for the next chapter. In the days that followed, the travelers and tribe members worked to help the young one regain strength. The riders helped carry supplies as a gesture of regret, and when they left, they did so quietly and without weapons raised. Peace did not erase what they had done, but it created a door none expected. The Apache woman, young one, and scout guided their way back toward the northern homeland, while the traveler rode beside them part of the way before farewell. At the river crossing, she promised she would wait for him when the time was right, and he promised he would return as someone who sought family, not fortune. Months later, after preparing his own ranch with respect, planting gardens instead of building fences, and creating a space built on trust rather than fear, he rode north beneath the tall pines she once described. When he reached the edge of her homeland, she stepped out to greet him, no longer tired, no longer hunted, but strong, proud, and free. The young one stood beside her, smiling with new strength, and the scout nodded with quiet approval. They walked forward together, not as strangers, not as rescuers or rescued, but as to souls choosing a peaceful path in a frontier world that often forgot kindness. Their story traveled through the land like a soft wind, reminding people that hope, respect, and human dignity were the real treasures of the old American frontier, and that hearts could build stronger homes than fences ever could. And in that hidden valley, where river water shined like silver, their future finally began, not in chains, not in fear, but in freedom, love, and lasting peace.